Welcome to What's Wrong with This Picture with Dennis Guillaume. I'm Dave Dufour, and we are back for another episode of fun and interesting conversation about taking pictures, processing and working with your pictures, and also sharing your pictures that you take along the RV trail. We are going to talk today about processing your pictures, right. And that really can be anything from simply some very simple kinds of things to, and you can get as complicated as you want to. And
right.
And what we're lucky enough, of course, is that to have today is some photos that were sent in by viewers, and we encourage you to do that, and we'll give you some information on how to do that in just a few minutes. But we have a couple of photos from viewers that we're going to work with and talk to you about. And so what is processing your pictures?
Well, it's sort of like, Dave, in the old days, you took the picture and then you took the film out and sent it in to be processed.
Right.
And that's when they put it in the soup and they did all the things that they were going to do to print the pictures that were in there. Well, we don't do that anymore, fortunately. We actually are able to, because of the magic of digital, we're able to do the processing ourselves using some software, and there's a great variety of software out there. In the first place, let me say one thing. I think almost any competent photographer is going to tell you that the first goal of a good photographer is to get the picture right, as close to right as you can in the camera first.
Right. Yeah.
Don't get in the habit of saying, well, that's pretty close, I can fix it in whatever, Photoshop or whatever. It's much better if you can get it just pretty close to what you want, and then you can always do some tweaking and some fine tuning of that picture in the software.
And that really comes down to understanding your camera and understanding what kind of what its capabilities are, and also having an eye for good composition and all that kind of stuff as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
what's first here?
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk about is the fact that when you do head toward processing your pictures, there are a number of choices. You can spend a fair amount of money and buy Photoshop, the famous one that every professional and graphic artist uses.
Right.
But you don't have to. You can get some pretty nice software, much of it free, as a matter of fact, off of the internet. You can load your pictures up to the internet and work on them and save them back down on your computer. There are lots of alternatives there, and we'll talk later on about some of those alternatives and what you might look for in the software when you pick one. And right now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the fact that now you've taken a picture, you've downloaded it to your computer,
right.
And now we're going to do just a little bit of tweaking.
Okay.
So I'm going to use a portion of Photoshop that's called Camera Raw.
Okay.
And a lot of people don't realize that, I think, that Camera Raw doesn't just work on raw images. That's a format that we shoot in professional
cameras.
Raw
is a totally uncompressed kind of...
Right.
Most point-and-shoot cameras and non-professional cameras shoot basically a JPEG, a JPG file. Right. Whereas professional cameras will, and that's a compressed file because it takes up less room. And then when we get to a RAW file, that's uncompressed. But but what are the advantages of the RAW file?
Well, first of all, when you compress anything, you take things away.
Right.
You lose pixels, you lose colors that aren't being used or that the software perceives as not being used in that picture. And so when you shoot RAW, as many of us do, you're asking the camera to record everything it sees, but do nothing to it.
Right.
In other words, don't try to adjust balance of color or don't try to adjust anything else, contrast or all those other things. And so we download a raw image, and then we work on it in a piece of software like this to make sure that we've got every available bit of information in the file, so we get the best we can possibly get out of it.
Okay, so but in this case now you can still open a JPEG as if it were camera raw and manipulated in Photoshop.
That's right. That's the part that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that camera raw from Adobe, for example, or any of the other camera raw types of things, actually will let you open a JPEG file too.
Okay.
Not all the features will be available, but most of them are.
Okay.
And so what we're going to do here, let's go to our computer, And what we're going to do here is we're going to look at an example of a camera raw screen in which we've opened an image that we'll talk about later. One of our viewers sent us this image, and we'll be telling you who he was. And
it was Randy, and I can't remember the last name. Randy.
Randy, don't tell me. Randy McLaren.
McLaren, I think it is, from Greenfield, Indiana.
Yeah.
Right. Great.
In any case.
Thanks, Randy.
In any case, Randy sent a beautiful picture here, and we're going to look at it in camera raw because what I can show you here is the kinds of features you should be looking for in any software that you might decide to use as your editing software. First of all, if we look over here, you're going to see this little graph. It's called a histogram. Histogram is going to give you some important information we'll talk about a little bit later that tells you how well balanced the picture happens to be. And that's right up there. Next, what we can do is if you go down this list of things, these features can be found in software like Picnic or Picasa or Photoshop Elements. There are all kinds of things besides Photoshop itself. But things you can do, for example, is you can adjust the temperature of the picture. And the temperature being the color balance, whether it's a warm color balance or a cooler color balance, whether there's more blues or more golds in it. The other thing that you can do is you can adjust exposure. You might think, well, I took the picture, I set the exposure in the camera, and I'm stuck with it. And that's really not true. You can make adjustments in the software to kind of tweak what you got.
Digital is more forgiving than old-style film photography?
Yeah, well, yeah. Actually, film was pretty forgiving, too. You could, what we called push film and that sort of thing, but it was a lot harder to do and more complicated. This is really pretty easy to do. But we can work with the exposure, and then the next slider down on this particular screen is recovery. You see right there where we're looking at the screen, you see those two little red dots right up above the skyline, or up above the mountain there.
Right there we go.
Yeah, those two little red dots are put in there by Camera Raw, telling us that we've blown out the information right there in those couple of spots in those clouds.
It's overexposed. When you blown out, it's overexposed?
Yeah, we lost all of the detail in that particular, in those spots, and which means it's pure white.
Okay.
And so there's nothing you can do with that. It's gone.
All right.
But what we can do by moving exposure around, we can actually bring some of that back and if it's not completely gone, and adjust how the overall picture is exposed. Right below that is recovery, and recovery is one of those neat little sliders you can use in a situation like this if you want to. This isn't bad at all. This is not something you probably would even chase. But in a case where we got a bit more stuff that's a little bit overexposed, we can use the recovery slider to bring some of that back and recover it. You can use some of the software has fill light. Blacks, there's a slider for blacks. Black slider is really important.
Right.
It's a neat way of getting some edge and some detail and some definition in your picture.
In photography, you might refer to it as it makes the picture pop a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Brightness and contrast, we all pretty much know about that. There's a slider down there called clarity. Clarity is another one of those really useful sliders that actually defines better the edges of objects.
Okay.
So it doesn't work on the whole picture, it works on edges and helps to define things a little bit.
Is that like the edge sharpening that we see on some other programs?
Yeah,
Similar?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's quite similar to that. Most programs now are offering clarity as one of the options. There was also vibrance, which helps you to increase the intensity of the color a little bit, but it doesn't move everything.
Okay.
And then saturation, just adjusts the saturation of the picture altogether. Now we move to another slider, which actually, or another screen, which is actually comes when you take, when you click on the icon that has these two little triangles or teepees in it.
Right.
And on this particular one, what you're able to do here is, one, adjust sharpness. And sharpness is extremely important. I don't think I've seen very many pictures come out of a digital camera that we're not in need of at least a little sharpening.
bit, right?
Yeah, not a lot, but I mean, you know, a little bit of sharpening to kind of bring the edge right up to it.
It's always possible to overdo that, of course.
Absolutely, and we'll show a little bit later what overdone looks like.
Okay.
We'll burn it. In any case, there is on this same screen, there is the slider for detail. Radius, the default for radius being 1, that's pretty much okay in most cases. Detail, you can adjust a little bit how much detail is in there. And if you've shot in low light, like this particular picture in this case is sent by another gentleman.
This was sent by the way, yeah, I was ready for it this time. This is from Tom Whitney, another viewer in Gainesville, Florida. So thanks a lot, Tom, for sending us. This is a gorgeous shot. We're going to look at both of these in a little more detail in our next segments. But
the point here,
yeah.
I think, for this one is he was shooting in low light. And some cases in low light, he didn't have the problem here. But in some cases, low light will cause you to get what we call noise or grain in the picture.
Right, yeah.
And right here, this slider that is called luminance under noise reduction allows you to make adjustments that decrease the effectiveness of that noise and make it smooth out and make it look a lot better. So, and there are a couple of other sliders that if your noise is really, really bad.
Now that doesn't blur it, does it?
No. Well, if you go too far, it will.
Oh, okay.
But it does allow you to kind of smooth things out a little bit.
Sort of blends the noise together a little bit, detects it and blends it.
If you're stuck with the difference between way too much noise, which is not becoming in most cases,
right,
or having it smoothed out and taking a little of the edge off the picture,
right,
we probably go with
yeah, I've never seen noise used as an artistic effect, or very rarely. It doesn't really work that well.
Yeah.
So
in any case, this takes us through these various adjustments that you can make, and we'll talk more detail about how those adjustments work. And there are a few others, but most of them you aren't going to normally mess with a normal picture.
And most of these things that we're seeing here, there is either the same thing or a version of the same thing in other kinds of software out there. So if you don't want to shell out for Adobe Photoshop, and it is not an inexpensive program, there are some other programs that offer many of the same details, even though we're demonstrating on Adobe here. By the way, if you want to send us some photos, please email us at picture@rvnn.tv. That way Dennis will get your photos and we can talk about those on the air. And or if you have a question, comment, or a suggestion, you can also telephone us at 877-578-7866. That's 578-RVNN. Use extension 704, and that goes right to Dennis's voicemail. You can also follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Flickr. Actually, you can follow the whole network on Facebook, Twitter, and Flickr. Yeah,
Flitter?
Yeah, it's easy for you to say, right? Anyway, and also if you'd like up-to-the-minute information, updates on things that are happening right at this moment, send a text message. Just text RVNN to 72727, and that will put you on our text message list, and you'll find out when we're streaming live, or when some other special events are coming up, or when a new show is available online on the various channels that we have. So stick with us. We're going to be talking more about processing your pictures here on What's Wrong with This Picture.
For more TV like this from the world of RVs, head to rvnn.tv.